Hello, and welcome to this week's Ethical Dilemma in Science, where we are going to look at celebrating some of the successes that scientists and clinicians have made in developing new medications, as well as recognize some of the challenges associated with having safe and effective medications approved. In order to answer the question, why is the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, approving dangerous drugs? This slide is from a 2023 Nature Reviews Drug Discovery article taking a look at FDA approvals over the last 30 years. And so what we can see is these blue bars are going to represent new molecular entities, so basically new active ingredients that have not previously been approved either individually or in combination with other agents that they're mixed with. And then the gray at the top are going to be biologic license applications. So these are things like monoclonal antibodies, growth factors, things that have been isolated and purified from animals or microorganisms. And interestingly enough, insulin now is recognized as a biologic. Now, the important thing to recognize is in 2022, again, the last year which we have data for this, 37 new drugs were approved. And so these were drugs that had not been approved previously or marketed within the United States. 20 of the 37 are for rare diseases, so diseases affecting 200,000 people or less in the United States, as well as 20 of the 37, again, a little over half, are first in class, meaning that they're looking at a new mechanism of biological action that is different from existing therapies. So they're basically new approaches to treating the medications. Taking a look at this exciting period of time over the last 10 years from 2013 to 2022, the FDA has been approving an average about 43 novel drug approvals per year. Now, tempering the excitement of all of these new medications making it on the market with FDA approval, we also need to take a look at the challenges associated with these new medications. Virtually all medications are going to have a variety of side effects associated with it. Side effects are secondary, basically unwanted effects associated with taking the drug. Clinicians in most cases are going to be aware of this and then warn the patient of these potential side effects. In addition to the side effects, there are going to be adverse events. Now, adverse events are going to be more serious. These are unintended effects associated with the drugs. In general, these are going to be unexpected, and they include things like drug allergies and intolerance. And so what's represented on this slide is the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, Adverse Events Reporting System public dashboard. And so we can see that over the past almost 25 years now, we've seen a steady increase in the number of adverse events that are being reported. Now, it's important to recognize that with these adverse event reports, they haven't been evaluated as shown in this public database. They may have some duplicates, they may have some incomplete reports, and the information has not been verified. And so we can't use this information to determine the rates of occurrence of adverse effects. And as always, you should check with your healthcare provider in order to be able to determine whether or not a specific medication is appropriate for you. This week's Ethical Dilemma in Science is based on the July 2023 FDA approval of an Alzheimer's drug, Lecanemab. Now, this is a drug that received accelerated approval previously. So accelerated approval is for drugs that are shown to be safe, that have a treatment for a serious condition in which there's an unmet medical need. So basically no existing medication for that, and then this drug was approved because it reduced the production of amyloid plaques within the brain. Now, these amyloid plaques accumulate in the brain and are thought to have an effect on the progression of the disease. Now, when the FDA granted accelerated approval, it required that the company do phase 3 confirmatory clinical trials. And those trials now are complete. They're showing the modest effect of this drug to slow cognitive decline in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. And so that's exciting. That's interesting. But it's also interesting that there are serious side effects associated with this disease, and the side effects are serious enough to receive a box warning. So basically, what is the drug doing, and what is a box warning, and what is the information that we need to learn from this? This drug is an example of a monoclonal antibody. Basically, antibodies are proteins that are found within your body that are used by your immune system to identify and destroy or eliminate potential pathogens from the body. So the way that this drug works is here we have a patient that is being infused with the medication. And so basically in an IV, you've got these antibodies. They get into the bloodstream. They're transported throughout the body. Ultimately, they're going to get into the brain where we have this concern with Alzheimer's disease. And these antibodies, kind of illustrated by these little kind of inverted kind of orangish Y's here, are going to interact with the amyloid, these kind of blue spring-like structures here. Now, what happens in Alzheimer's disease is that these amyloid proteins kind of aggregate together and form plaques, and these plaques are thought to be involved with the progression of Alzheimer's disease. They potentially damage the cells within the brain. What this monoclonal antibody does is basically the little orange inverted Ys are going to bind to the amyloid proteins. They're going to identify these amyloid proteins as potentially being hazardous to the body. And so the body's immune system, what we've got here with these purplish cells, are going to come in and basically eliminate those things in which the antibody is bound to, eliminate these potential toxins or pathogens. And so by acting in this way, this antibody can reduce the production of these amyloid plaques. And it's thought that by reducing the amyloid plaque production, you can delay or at least slow the onset of Alzheimer's disease. So what this company did in their phase 3 confirmatory clinical trials is that they monitored these patients for 18 months, and they were showing that the patients that received this antibody had less cognitive decline than patients that received placebo. Now, the company is going to continue to evaluate the patients for longer periods of time to provide, again, further evidence associated with the effectiveness of this medication. The identified side effects for this medication are things like a headache or infusion-related reactions, basically receiving the IV, but there is a more serious side effect associated with it. This more severe side effect is referred to as amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, basically ARIA. And so what is that? And so if we look at imaging of the brain here, we can see a baseline patient. And so you can see kind of this is the brain, the dark white around the outside is the skull. Then after the infusion of this antibody, we've got this kind of imaging abnormality. We've got this kind of cluster that's appearing here. Now, under most circumstances, this is a temporary swelling of the brain that will resolve itself over time. And so basically it will kind of go back to normal without any intervention. The problem comes is that these locations of these kind of accumulations or these imaging abnormalities are also locations where bleeding can be occurring either in or on the surface of the brain. And then bleeding of the brain is very, very hazardous and very, very dangerous and needs to be monitored. So basically what happens if you've got bleeding in the brain, and I've got a slide here from the Mayo Clinic showing intracerebral hemorrhage. We can see, again, imaging over here on the left, an artist rendition over here on the right. We can see the area of the hemorrhage, basically the area of bleeding into the brain. Now, if we think about it, most of our heads are relatively thick and hard. Our brain is going to be located in that. It's great because it's protected, from bumping our heads onto things. But there's a limited amount of space in that. If all of a sudden we've got this blood kind of accumulating with this area, that accumulation of fluid is going to compress areas of the brain. And in the process of compressing areas of the brain, it can cause damage to those cells and basically kill the cells in that region. And again, damage or death of cells in the brain is something that is not easily recovered from. And so there are very, very serious risks associated with this. Now, the risks have been identified for patients that have a specific genetic condition, and so it's possible to kind of screen patients to see if they have the genes that would make them at a higher risk for these abnormalities and this bleeding, as well as patients that may be on blood thinners for things like atrial fibrillation. And so patients with blood thinners or anticoagulants are going to be more at risk for brain bleeding. And so because of that, they need to be, monitored or potentially not use this medication because of the risks associated with it. In the approval of this drug, the FDA recognized that it has the potential to help a lot of people, but there are severe, serious risks associated with it. And so what is this box warning? A box warning, formerly known as a black box warning, was first implemented in 1979 to alert physicians and pharmacists about the potential risks associated with the medication. And so I've got an example of one up here. So you can see it's got a black border, black box all around the outside. All of the text is in bold, and it warns of the potential severe side effects, in this case, death or permanent disability. And so this is not to prevent the use of the medication, but to make sure that the physician is aware of those risks and is in a position to try to reduce the risk severity in the patients with this drug. So in some cases, the box warning medications are going to require the physician undergo additional training to be able to prescribe it. It may be a medication that can only be administered in a certain setting, so under supervision or in an inpatient setting in a hospital, where the patient can be monitored for these side effects. Now, in general, these box warnings are going to apply to a class of drugs, and they're not meant to mean that the drug can't be used, but it means that the severe side effects need to be considered when prescribing this drug. Now, as of about 2023, there are only about 400 different medications that have box warnings associated with them. With this background information, we now get to the ethical dilemma in science for this week. Why is the FDA approving dangerous drugs? And in order to understand that, we need to look at some, more focused questions associated with it. Should potentially harmful medications be approved if they can help some people? Does the FDA have a responsibility to ensure the safety of a drug, or is their role to provide the medication so that clinicians and patients can make an informed risk-benefit decision? Is the benefit of the medication greater than the potential risk associated with it? And then finally, should approval of these drugs wait until potentially long-term effects of the continued use are known? Please see the description below for additional information and references. If you want to learn more about this topic, I've also given a couple recommended articles that are kind of key to the understanding of this. Thank you, and have a great week.